Hello and welcome to this second installment in my Panzer Corps 2 demo series on YouTube. Very exciting times. We just went from beta 7 to beta 8, so that's good for me as a tester. We're moving one step closer to the ultimate goal. But in this installment, we will talk about a new, extremely exciting feature, and that's general's traits. Each general can have positive or strengths, and it can have negative or weaknesses associated with it. So you start with a number of points that you can pick positive traits with, or you can take some additional negative traits to free up more slots for positive traits. And actually, when you start a new campaign game, you can go to this advanced options pane. These are the default difficulty levels, but you also have some advanced controls, and here you can set your trait points from 0 to 10. For the longest time in all the previous beta, the trait point total has been only 1, but it has now been increased to 2. That alone is very exciting, because then you can create more interesting combination without taking too many harshly crippling negative traits. But let's start a campaign, a default campaign play, and let's do Poland North, just to give you an idea what I'm talking about. So the game loads, and you can actually give your general a name. I can't type for. So Maximilian from Eagle's Nest, and you can select a photograph. I'll keep it anonymous, I guess. So that's his name. I would not be surprised if that name gets dropped in various briefings throughout the game. I certainly hope so. Not currently implemented, but I think it will. So let's go through the strength first, and then look at the weaknesses and discuss some of the ramifications here. And the first ramification is that if you don't want to, no two playthroughs need be the same. So there are already lots of branches to the main Wehrmacht campaign, but using various strengths and weaknesses, you can create a completely different play experience. All these have a variety of costs, and this has changed in this beta. So you have some that cost 1, and you have some that cost 2, and you also have some that are really harsh and give you more points. For example, if you cannot have an air force at all, you get 3 extra picks. So these numbers need not be final, but will probably be tweaked just a little bit before final launch. So don't fuss too much over that. On the other hand, fear of the unknown, you can't just move into the unknown, into the fog of war. You have to scout ahead of you. It's worth only one point, and so forth. So for this playthrough, I would like to have my infantry trait, and that costs 2, so already I used up all my points, and I will then have to find some negative traits to compensate. So, but infantry general, it slashes the cost of your infantry units, and infantry unit is one of the core components. So anything that frees up slots, because in Panzer Corps 2, it's not just about prestige. Prestige is the money you use to buy new units, repair, and so forth, upgrade. But you also have slots. If you played Order of Battle, it's something similar. So your bridge engineer take only 1 slot, but your max overstrength Tiger 2 tank, it costs 18 slots. So of course, if that overstrength Tiger tank costs 25% less, and you have several of those, you have the opportunity to take perhaps 4 extra infantry or 2 extra good tanks or some more planes. So you could combine this. This is for infantry, and it's the same with panzers, and I think panzer will probably be a little bit more popular than infantry, but I can testify to both being extremely good. And I have played in my playthrough. I use both of these, and it frees up an incredible number of slots and give me a much larger force than is otherwise possible. So that is hugely impactful. This is more, you can see here, they cost 2 because they are really good. Industry connections is what I used to call cute in the previous beta, and now the cost is only half of these two guys. So you get the possibility of prototypes, and that's basically units arriving earlier than they normally would. So you could, I don't know, maybe start with a really good tank before the invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941. So this kicks in every scenario, and to equip one unit you have to have 10 strength, so 1.5 to 2 units can get prototypes. So it can be good, it can be really good sometimes, but it's not as good as either of these, so I think they hit pretty good. Liberator, it's not so interesting on the lower difficulties, but on General Field Marshal, you are hit by -30 and -75% prestige, and also some of the challenge modes. There's a challenge mode that doesn't give you any prestige at all, except for flags recapture and enemy units you forced to surrender. So this will be hugely useful there, of course. Deep Recon. It's cute, and it permanently reveals the locations around objective access, so more intel is always good, but you can often get this intel by flying a scout plane over. So in this beta 8, I see they have added an accuracy bonus to all recon units. And all recon units already give an accuracy bonus of, I think it is 10%, so with this trait on 1 point, the recon gives 15% accuracy bonus, and that is significant because normal units have 50% accuracy. So if your units go from 50 to 65% accuracy, and they shoot once per strength point, and infantry is now 15 points, so you can do the math there. It's a pretty big difference in the long run. So I think it is cheap and good now. This one, it gets you extra initiative at the start, so it lets you punch through defensive lines because you will typically fire before the defender and kill and suppress a lot of him. So this is niche, I would say. It could be really, really good if you like going on offensive immediately and punching into defensive line, but on those scenarios where the defender is more spread out, there is a lot of terrain, invasion of Norway, for example, that sort of thing, it's not so impactful. But you have several scenarios where this could be hugely useful, and +4 initiative is a lot. Yes, this is good. Basically, your tanks go faster, and faster tanks are always better because they can be more places, get around things, encircle, that sort of thing. And you can cross minor rivers, not the major ones. They require a bridge engineer or a bridge, but minor ones you can just drive right across them. Very useful. It's not a total game changer, but it's very useful. Battle Academy, well, I don't think I completely agree with this one because experience growth is pretty fast. You have from 0 to 5 stars, where 0, those are recruits, new units, and those 5-star units are rare, super, ultra veterans at the end of the campaign, or units you especially farmed for extra experience. And I don't think this plus 25%, it really doesn't do much. You level up a little bit quicker, but it's definitely not as impactful as these other 2-pointers. So I think I will argue that in the beta forum, but I could be wrong. Other people could have other experiences. This one is hugely underrated, but few players will actually want to take it because Panzer Corps is about your core force, building up your forces sealing gain experience and better equipment, and this is completely the opposite. It lets you buy units that go away at the end of the scenario. So why do this? That is of course because every prestige point you invest in auxiliaries is damage not incoming to your core units. So you could send infantry across the river, have extra artillery to support your good units, cheap artillery, and you can use some extra fighters to just soak up damage or escort your elite bombers. So this one, I have tried it. I think I played about 10 scenarios with it, and it's really, really useful. Trophies of War, it's costed at 2. That probably means it's good. Basically, in Panzer Corps 2, if you surround an enemy unit using units and zone of control, and you force it to retreat, it has a lot of suppression, and it's attacked, and it gets pushed back. It has nowhere left to go. You can also do this if it's standing on an impassable river or can't get away for some other reason. Maybe it already retreated and ran out of movement points. Then you capture the equipment. Doesn't work for infantry or planes, only for vehicles, tanks, guns, that sort of thing. Then you get those strength points remaining. So if I surround and force a T-34 to surrender, I will get those 7 points of T-34 that remain. But of course, if there's just 1 strength point left when it surrenders, it's almost meaningless. But this one doubles it. So you get 7, not 7, but you get 14, and this quickly stacks up. But it requires a special way of playing where you surround units without trying to completely wipe them out. I'm more of a wipe them out kind of guy. So it's not for me. But also interesting, when you force a surrender, you get a small prestige kickback. I don't remember how big. It's not very, very big, but if you make this a thing for yourself, then you can get quite a bit of extra prestige from it. And of course, this trait gives you extra prestige. So I prefer to play with German equipment. I'm not so interested in running around with Matilda 2s and T-34s. But some of the Allied equipment is, strictly speaking, better than the Germans have. So taking captured equipment can be really, really good. It just requires a certain playstyle. But again, on those difficulties where you get little prestige, I mean, if you combine Trophies of War with this Liberator thing, you can get loads and loads of extra prestige, and it can be important. But this doesn't suit me, but it could suit you. Yeah. Deadly Grasp. Encirclement is a new mechanic in Panzer Corps. Basically, you now get auto-supplied at the start of every turn, provided you can trace the line back to a supply point. The supply point is a hex with a sort of a green light in it. Maybe we can scroll. Yes, there's a supply point. So you have to be able to trace, and this is one of my supply points. I have to trace my supply lines back to there. If you can't do that, if my supply lines must cross something impassable, a river, high mountains, enemy units or zones of control, then I'm out of supply. And I mean, I'm encircled and I will be out of supply. And that means I won't be getting fuel back, not getting ammo back. I also can't recover my suppression from turn to turn. I can't reinforce. And on top of that, I get an initiative and accuracy penalty for every round that I am encircled. So in a few turns, 2, 3, 4, 5, you can have completely decimated the defender. He has no initiative. He has almost no accuracy left, and whatever suppression damage you inflicted with artillery, it just sticks. So you can surround Kiev or Paris or something and just watch the defenders wither away and then just sweep them away. But this also requires a certain play style, because it requires you to surround and wait. If you surround and then destroy on the same turn, there is no discernible benefit. So what this one does is letting you surround and then quickly stack the bonuses, so you don't have to stand around something and wait for several turns. This is usually enough to just wait one turn, surround, wait the turn, attack, and then get the decent reduction in accuracy and initiative for the defender. Flexible command, I wish I used that one more. In Panzer Corps 2, you can split your units and recombine them. But splitting requires a slot, and typically you are already using all your slots because there are never enough slots. So I end up never splitting. There are times when splitting could be good, getting around the enemies, encircling him, or extending your own lines to protect the vulnerable piece of artillery, for example. So it can be very, very good. The question is, are you saving up a slot or two with every scenario to be able to use it, or are you using one of your slots? Hard to say. Killer team. Heroes in this game, I feel, come in 3 tiers. Really, really good, and no. Do I really have to have this hero? So there are 3 tiers, and you're always desperately wishing for the top tiers, but you're not getting them all the time. So I will say this is a hit and miss thing. Either you are extremely happy with the heroes you get, you are not so happy, but you can live with it, or you get a selection of really sad heroes, and then you instantly regret picking killer team, and then you go back and start over. Speaking of heroes, you get not on the first scenario, but every scenario thereafter by default in the core campaign. I can't say how that would work in other campaigns and settings. You get 1 hero. So after the end of just full run of the campaign, you will have 20 plus heroes. So this is extremely impactful if you get good heroes early on for the first 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 scenarios. It really matters if you have good heroes, but after that it diminishes. Anti-air veteran, extremely interesting because anti-air artillery is like ordinary artillery. It primarily does suppression damage. So planes will take some damage and a lot of suppression, so maybe they will almost or completely abort their attack if hit by a good volley of anti-aircraft fire. Maybe they get hit by an 88 and then flak fiddling and no attack happens, but totally it loses 2 or 3 points of strength, but the rest of the air attack units are suppressed and very weak against attack by your fighters, of course. But what this anti-air veteran does, it turns suppression into kills. And that's the only way you can play with denied air force, for example. So I really like this one because it lets me keep my air force small. I usually keep it back as a small reserve of Stukas, a couple of fighters, and then I use it only in mid-late scenario to bomb key enemy units. Without this, you need to have a sizable fighter force. Perimeter control, it's not much really, but in Panzer Corps, whenever you enter the zone of control, that being the hexes that surround an enemy unit, you have to stop. You can't move any further, no matter how fast you are, unless you have phased movement like recon cars, that is. But what perimeter controls let you do is ignore enemy zone of control if you have a unit in that hex. So if you approach a city from the front, even with slow infantry, they can easily glide around and can completely surround the enemy. And you can also sometimes just slip through cracks in his defenses and get to anti-tank guns, artillery and stuff that is hiding in the back. I think many will find that this is not necessary. They like a more frontal approach, but for what it does, it's one of my favorites. And see, they have priced it reasonably at one point. So in my playthrough that was in beta 7, that's on YouTube, I have picked infantry general, panzer general, anti-air veteran, and perimeter control. That's a total of 7 picks, I think. 2, 4, 6, 7, yes, and I have 2, so I'm lacking 5, and I play with no overstrength, and I play with bad luck. Oh, they priced that only to -1. It's actually pretty horrible. And inefficient supply, so 6, so I could not actually play that combination that I'm playing now because I'm 1 point short. Then I would have to go out in the main menu and change the numbers there. So it's interesting. It's a balancing act. Testers try this and the developers try it and they get feedback. Maybe the total picture will change. Oh, and before we take the weaknesses, there's another very interesting possibility here, and that is experience growth for your general. It can't get stars, but it could, at certain points in the campaign, get extra selection points. So let's say you've finished the fall of France, you have taken Paris, you are the great hero of the Wehrmacht, and sorry about the stupid German there. And then you get one extra selection or 2 or something. I don't know. And then you can use it to remove one of your weaknesses, or maybe take another strength. And maybe then in 1943 something like that happens. The Germans are in full retreat, but at least your general gets some experience. So I hope to see that implemented in the core campaign. I can't guarantee it will happen, but it would be very exciting to see it happen, and I think a lot of players would find that tremendously interesting. So the weaknesses, and heads up, these weaknesses are generally speaking much worse than what you get from these strengths. So just clicking a lot of these on random, that will just completely cripple you. I have had some playthroughs where I have tested some negative traits and I have completely shot myself in the foot and barely been able to get out of Poland. So you have to have a plan when you pick the negative traits. So this was minus 20% core slots before. That was punishing, to say the least. So it's cut to minus 10%, and you might think this is relatively cheap, but minus 10%, well, maybe I don't think they even will balance, because panzers will only make up a large portion, but only a portion of your force. So this is not really a net gain. So if you're thinking about combining those, I don't know. No, overstrength is when you give your units strength points above and beyond what they usually can have. And if you look at the map behind me here, we can see that, as in other older games, 10 is the gold standard, but for infantry the new base size is 15. So these other units could get up to 15, that's max overstrength, and infantry can get to 20. But that requires extra prestige, and last but not least, extra slots. To add 5 strength to something uses an equal number of slots as the unit cost to begin with. So these pioneers are 4 points, so if I want them to be strength 20, that's 8 points. So why is this so big in Panzer Corps? That is, of course, I mean, having a lot of units is great in some circumstances, but being able to attack your opponent with overwhelming force in a small area, or set up an impenetrable barrier by quality tanks, anti-tank guns, artillery that have been overstrengthened, that is really, really powerful. It's called concentration of force, and it's a real concept in military operation. And I think overstrength represents that very well. So if you take this one, you are shooting yourself in the foot. I'm playing with this currently, and it is very painful, but very interesting. So I get a lot of units, but they are all base strength. This is, of course, extremely painful. You can't bring aircraft at all. You can take anti-air veteran, and you get a net gain of 1 point. That is, of course, significant. I wouldn't worry too much, because you free up a lot of slots and prestige, so you can have tons of both heavy 88s and smaller flak feelings, 37mm guns, so you could protect yourself very well from enemy aircraft. But the problem is, of course, on those scenarios where you'd like to bomb enemy ships, you can't do that, or you want to crack open those Matilda 2s or those KV tanks. That's not happening because you have no air force at all. So that's at 3 points now. This is equally horrible, or I would say even worse. Playing the entire World War II without artillery sounds very, very difficult, and also extremely unthematic. This one I could take because, yeah, I'm a Panzer general. I don't run the Luftwaffe. Maybe the Luftwaffe doesn't care about me. They're busy doing other things. But to imagine combined arms operation without artillery, yes, no. Definitely not. Retrograde, you basically get the new fun equipment later. So it's bad, it's not impossible to play with. You could do retrograde and industrial connections, for example, and hope you get some good replacement. So most of your army is pretty old-fashioned, but you have some nice tigers mixed in there. And you have a net gain of 1 point. So I think that's a cool combination. But I think many players will shy away from this because, well, it's Panzer Corps, you want the new equipment. This also, they have increased, that's very good. It was just a cheap one before, but you are, they are also, okay, you can use elite replacement 3 times per mission, so you are limited. Before you couldn't do it at all, and they've upped the cost also, so this might actually be playable now. Very interesting. I will give it a run one of these days. So, because when you aren't using elite replacements, you of course will lose experience if your units take damage, and that is a huge no-go, of course. And to move on, delayed reinforcement. You cannot use replacements in the middle of battle. I have tried playing this. It's the worst thing. You can maybe try to combine it with auxiliary force, but sooner or later your key units are going to take some damage. A plane will be half shot to death. One of your artillery gets bombed, or your good infantry gets slowly worn down as you proceed into Stalingrad or Moscow, and not being able to reinforce them is just, it's not impossible, but it is extremely punishing. Yeah, this one, it's not so bad, but the random nature, you can bet that on occasion, absolutely the wrong units lose their attack and move points. But it can work if you are a diligent player and you like those steady, slow advances where you set up good defensive positions as you go forward. So for me, this is doable. Chaotic fire. It uses ammo more quickly. So basically there's a real chance you will run out, especially if attacked several times by enemy units. But it's not so problematic that you can't live with it, since it only gives -1 point. This should not be combined with inefficient supply, because inefficient supply gives you only a little bit of fuel and ammo each turn instead of getting your full allotment. And this one can be worked around, and you see it's only a -1 point by not advancing too quickly. Slow and steady, and spread your fire with several units. Don't use the same tank to overrun the enemy several rounds in a row. Spread it around a little. Stop up, reinforce, regain supplies. Full ground control, absolutely punishing. You don't have a zone of control, so enemy units can just zip through any hole in your lines. So difficult to fight. Bad luck. I tried my hand at this. Maybe they underestimate how bad it is, because every shot is either on spot on the prediction or worse. You will never get a break. So on average, you're always doing a little bit less damage every single attack that you do, every single time you defend. And throughout the campaign, that's stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks. So I'm playing with no overstrength and bad luck. So my units are smaller, than they might otherwise be, and they're always doing slightly less damage than they should be. And that's actually starting to feel the friction there. So very exciting. Trench slug. Entrenchment is important in Panzer Corps too, in a way it hasn't been before. You just can't use your tanks to take close terrain like mountains, hills, forests, and cities. They will be completely butchered by infantry defending those positions. Absolutely cannot do it. So that is a huge improvement. So you have to go combined arms, and your tanks can guard the approaches through the city and the flanks of your army, but it's the infantry that has to go in. And infantry that fights infantry in close terrain, there is a lot of entrenchment going on, and there's also the factor that the enemy is increasing his entrenchment the longer he remains stationary. And with this trench slug thing, it reminds you of World War I, doesn't it? Then the rate at which you reduce the enemy's entrenchment, which you do by attacking him, is reduced. Basically, your ordinary units do no entrenchment damage. Nothing at all. So you need heavy artillery or strategic bombers or something, or hero, or engineers. Lots of engineers, because they help bypass entrenchment. So if you don't know what you are doing, this will feel like running into a wall when trying to take close terrain or cities. Slow modernization. You can, they tweaked it a little, so you're up to 3 units per mission that can be upgraded, and change of unit type is considered an upgrade. So if I upgrade from a Panzer IIIe to an F, that's an upgrade, but giving my infantry a half-track transport instead of a normal truck, or over-strengthening my fighter doesn't count. So now this one can actually be used. But you have to have a plan, because let's say the campaign is 20 plus missions long, you will be limited to a total of 60 something upgrades. And so if you like swapping back and forth, you can't do that. But you can, of course, send things back into your reserve, and if you have enough prestige, you can buy the units. But you can't constantly be turning your engineers into Gebirgsjäger and back to heavy weapons, infantry, and that sort of thing. Fear of the unknown, it's not so horrible. Basically, you can't move into the fog of war. So most units have 2 spotting, but your scout planes and your scout cars have 4, especially the scout cars. They can use phase movement and open up the map for you, but it requires some extra planning. So those are the positive and negative traits or strengths and weaknesses of your general, and I think this has the potential to completely change the way campaigns play and add a tremendous amount of replayability. I've had many, especially using the negative ones, you can make some really, really interesting games that are completely different from what you're used to. These just give you bonuses, of course, but these help in many ways define how the game plays. So I'm almost more excited by the weaknesses than the strength, and you have to get a lot of the strengths you want, you have to pick these weaknesses. So also, since you can tweak the number of points you have under advanced settings, and there's also the promise of getting extra points during campaign play, I think this is one of the features that players will absolutely love. Okay. Next I'll cover units, and after that we'll pick off with the invasion of Poland. Thanks for watching.